Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode, before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 3, Episode 14, Walk on Water. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So in this episode, it is one of the episodes where all of the patients come from the same event, and in this case, it is a ferry boat accident. And as the group is going through their triage training or testing drills, the chief comes in to tell them about all hands on deck as there has been a mass casualty event that's occurred, and they aren't really told any details at that time. But all of the interns except Christina end up on the ambulance with Bailey, going to the site of the crash in order to do triage on site and help who they can, while Christina is left behind and helps to ready for the incoming patients. Once triage is completed, the most serious patients will of course then be sent to the trauma centers, and Seattle Grace is a trauma center, which is why they're going there. In addition, they're also the trauma center that the families are being told to go to find out about their loved ones. So obviously, when they get onto the scene, they're triaging everybody and it's very chaotic, but there are a few standout patients that they end up helping. The first standout patient is Izzy, and she is dragged away by a man who begs her to help him as search and rescue isn't available and his friend is trapped on the ferry boat. She agrees, and she is then basically taken to Rick, who is trapped between two cars and has a lot of traumas, and then his three friends are all gathered around him, basically trying to have a say and pushing Izzy to do her best to save him, saying that she has to, and she of course does her best. She sends one of them to try to find search and rescue, but they're refusing to come, saying that they are backlogged, so she's doing the best she can to maintain things. By the end of the episode, he is starting to seize, and that is the cliffhanger we leave that patient on. The second patient is Alex, and Alex finds a woman trapped under a cement pylon and half in the water. He sees that she's pregnant. At first, he goes down and checks for a pulse, doesn't find one, claims she's dead. However, as he's about to walk away, he hears some whimpering and sees her hand twitching, realizes that she is in fact alive, removes the cement pylon from her and gets her all the way back to Seattle Grace, where he where he in the ambulance is taking care of her and the baby, gets them into a somewhat stable condition. They're then brought in. However, once they're in, he's reassigned to go and tell the families whatever news they happen to have. Meanwhile, on the Christina is then assigned to Jane Doe, who we will learn in the future is Rebecca Pope, and basically stealing it from him. However, then she's kicked off by Burke, who takes over, and she's then sent to the pit to suture the non-emergent wounds that are coming in. And then finally we have Meredith, who is on site, and she finds a little girl without her mother and wants to take her to triage. However, she keeps getting distracted on the way to triage, until eventually she does end up finding a patient who managed to swim to shore, and she treats his leg wound. However, then when he starts flailing in pain, she gets knocked into the water, and that's the cliffhanger for the entire episode. That's the last scene we see. And then I'd forgotten, but George also finds a patient, a mother whose son is missing. She wants to not be treated until she can find her son. However, in the chaos, that's pretty much impossible at this point. So George convinces her that he'll go and find her son, provided that she gets her surgery. However, once they arrive at the hospital, he goes looking, calling around to try to find the son, but isn't able to, while the mother still refuses surgery, and that is the point where we leave that patient. She's on the operating table. Bailey's trying to convince her to get the surgery, but she is refusing to provide consent to the surgery until she knows about her son. And then George comes in the door, and we leave it there. This one didn't really have a lot of the personal drama. The only drama that was kind of there is George and Callie kind of adjusting to being spouses and working together, especially since she's kind of his boss, and how that dynamic will work at the hospital versus at home. And so they're figuring that out. And then, of course, Christina and Burke got engaged in the last episode. And Christina doesn't want Burke to tell anybody until she's told Meredith. However, at the start, Meredith's in a bit of a mood. So even though Christina keeps like glancing around the locker, smiling at her, Meredith keeps like kind of being short and asking what. And then Christina keeps chickening out on telling her the news. Meanwhile, Burke does tell Derek, who is his friend in the hospital, which then leads to it spreading throughout the hospital, which of course makes Christina mad because now instead of Meredith being happy that she's getting married, Meredith's only going to know that she was like the last to know, which upsets her. But that's basically a rundown of everything that's happened so far in this episode. Obviously, the carryover will be in the next episode where we'll find out more of the conclusions with some of the patients. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, we'll now rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. And on our mostly objective ranking list, we first start with our multi-episode supporting character introductions. These are the main named patients, which is Rick and Friends. Carly Height is the mother who lost her son, and then Lisa is the child that was going around with Meredith. They're each worth 2 points. Then worth 3 points, we have our multi-season supporting character introduction, and Rebecca Pope, who is the pregnant Jane Doe. She does recur pretty much the rest of the season and then into next season, so that is why she is in that category instead. And that's Alex's patient. Then we have our multi-season main character development, which I just grouped it in because it's the same development for pretty much everybody, and this is the first mass casualty event that we have seen within the series so far. Well, that they had to go on site for. So this is the first time we're seeing them leave the hospital to do triage at a secondary location on site. And so basically all the interns, all of our main characters, this is the first time we're seeing that. And honestly, in the series, this is the first big event. I believe in the earlier season, there was the train event. And then, of course, there was the bomb event. But this one is on like a whole new level for the series. So I gave 4 points for that. Then there's 4 points for the main relationship development, which of course is Burke telling Derek the news about an engagement, his engagement to Christina, which I believe the telling people part is part of the relationship development once you get engaged, which is why I'm giving it the points. And then we had another 4 points for the fact that I feel like this is a very strong plot concept, because this is one of the episodes, well, this one and the next one, that I feel is ingrained in my memory, no matter how many other episodes I see or how long the series goes on for. When I look back at what episodes stick out, what episodes will be remembered, that I will think of at random when I'm thinking, what will inspire me to go back and rewatch it yet again? This is one of the episodes that I remember that makes me think I want to go back and rewatch the series. And then I always remember when I think back on the series, if I'm trying to think of what I remember, like episodes that I remember. So for it to be so sticky in the mind, obviously it's a very strong plot concept, hence the 4 points that I've given it. And at this point, we are well above 10. So there isn't really a chance of this being any other score than a 10 out of 10. However, I do want to call out a couple of negatives. First is the negative messaging or behavior. And Meredith finds the child. She then brings the child with her to try to get her to triage. Even if she is distracted, she keeps the child with her, keeps an eye on the child. However, when she sees the man coming out of the water, she then leaves the child in the care of a paramedic And that paramedic then decides to abandon the child. And yes, the child didn't have any serious injuries, but it's still a missing child in a very chaotic place that is not united to anybody and should be brought to the appropriate place. This child has been left in his care. He has agreed to take charge of this child by Meredith before she walks away. And yet, instead of doing right by this very vulnerable child in midst of all this chaos, that paramedic then decides to completely abandon the child, who then finds her way back to Meredith until Meredith falls in the water and then the child walks away. But the fact that a child was abandoned in the midst of all this chaos instead of being brought to an appropriate place by the person whose care she was put in by Meredith, I think is very negative messaging our behavior. And if it was reality, I would say that paramedic should be fired. But -2 points for that. And then I also put in a -3 points for the main relationship regression or breakup. It's obviously not a breakup, but there is some regression in that Christina does become angry at Burke for not, like, she only made one request. We can tell everybody, but let me tell Meredith first. And Burke wasn't able to respect that request, told Derek. Now it's all over the hospital. And Christina is, in my opinion at least, rightfully upset about that. And they do get into a bit of a fight about it. Again, where Christina basically tells Burke off for it, and then Burke says that he takes her from the surgery and assigns her to sutures because that's where she's most needed, but potentially their fight might also have something to do with that. No way to tell for certain, so I'm still taking the 3 points. But again, we're still well over 10, so 10 out of 10 episode. And of course, with our mostly objective ranking, when more than one episode has the same score, we just rank it in episode order. So our mostly objective ranking so far has in first place Where the Boys Are, Don't Stand So Close to Me, Great Expectations, Wishin' and Hopin'. This episode comes in fifth, Walk on Water, followed by Let the Angels Commit, I Am a Tree, Time Has Come Today, Oh, the Guilt, Staring at the Sun, From a Whisper to a Scream, 6 Days, What I Am, and Sometimes a Fantasy is currently in 14th. Meanwhile, in the personal ranking, these episodes are my favorite kind, where all of the patients are relating to the same event, where there is a mass and memorable event. It's also very memorable because it's the first time that we're seeing them act as doctors outside of the hospital. Like the past big events that there's been, the train and the bomb, those were both in the hospital, the patients coming to the hospital where they were then treated and such. This is the first time we see they actually leave the hospital, go to the site of the accident, and have to handle the patients. And of course, all of the patients have major traumas that they are all needed for as surgeons and surgical interns. We have Izzy basically doing what she normally does, getting overly attached, being able to be convinced on an emotional level to go and treat a patient. So she feels empathetic to the friend's plea. Then when she finds Rick, she then is very committed to helping him with all his friends around and very pressured into, despite not having much confidence that she will be able to save him, doing everything that she can to try. And then, of course, we have Alex as Jane Doe, which becomes a short-term recurring character this season and into the early next season. Then we have the Meredith situation where she's now lost under the water, which is a great cliffhanger for the episode. And basically all the chaos, all of the excitement, it's go, go, go. It does start a little slow with everybody getting ready, but also while it's starting slow, that's kind of where they fit in the personal drama for the episode, because once everything starts happening, that's when they get to go even further. And I should point out that Richard did dye his hair, which became a bit of a deal among the attendings because, he looked odd with the dyed hair. And then additionally, Derek does get sent to the scene because there's reports of a bunch of head wounds on the scene, so he's sent there to make sure that they can at least make it to the hospital alive, hopefully. So ultimately, very exciting episode, one of my favorites, one of the most memorable for me, and also full of drama and left on a cliffhanger for basically all of the patients and Meredith, which I usually hate cliffhangers, to be honest. But in a situation like this, I feel like the cliffhanger is very necessary because there's so much trauma, there's so much complexity with the patients, and they want to focus so much on this event and the patients that they did need 2 episodes to do it. I am treating them separately though because they do have different titles and they aren't labeled clearly part 1, part 2. Therefore, they are counting as separate episodes. And this one being the first one was very good, like I said. I gave it a 10 out of 10 because I couldn't really think of any major flaws except for the child abandonment scene. Really was the only flaw that I could find, and therefore I can't give it anything lower than a 10 in my opinion. In fact, it is my favorite so far of the season, so I put it in first place, Walk on Water, followed by Wishin' and Hopin', Great Expectations, Don't Stand So Close to Me, 6 Days, Where the Boys Are, From a Whisper to a Scream, Staring at the Sun, Let the Angels Commit, I Am a Tree, What I Am, Sometimes a Fantasy, Time Has Come Today, and then in last we have Oh, the Guilt. And that brings us now to the series ranking so far, where we have our mostly objective ranking at Season 1 was 77.78%, Season 2 second at 76.67%, and Season 3 so far has a score of 91 out of a possible 230. On the personal side, however, we had Season 2 in first place at 72.22%, Season 1 in second with 66.67%, and then Season 3 so far has a pretty high score of 112 out of a possible 230. But with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 3, Episode 14, Walk on Water. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you on the next episode.